Check. Check. 1, 2, 3.
No, but this was.
He said he's like me. Testing, testing. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How's everybody doing? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So welcome everybody to our first day of this new semester. Inshallah ta'ala we'll be starting with clean deen first, and then inshallah ta'ala we'll be continuing with of light and fire inshallah. So let's get started. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So let's start our first session of clean deen inshallah ta'ala. So, inshallah ta'ala, this whole course is based on a book written by Imam Ibn Hajar. And Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani was one of the most famous scholars of hadith in Islamic history. Many works that he has compiled that have become famous from them is Fath al-Bari, which is it's an explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. Probably the most famous explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. You have other scholars just like Imam Ibn Hajar who became famous because of some of the works that they produced. For example, Imam al-Nawawi, right? Anybody who knows about Imam al-Nawawi, you know about Imam al-Nawawi because of the works that he has produced. Ibn Hajar is no different. So Ibn Hajar, he has benefited the Ummah tremendously in his works in explaining a hadith, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as the science of hadith, right? As well as the science of hadith. I'm just going to give you one example. Imam Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala, the same author of the text that we're going to deal with, inshallah ta'ala, he, when students around the world, it doesn't matter what country they study Islam in, generally speaking, students around the world, when they want to study the sciences of a hadith, right, when they want to study the science that is known as mustalah al-hadith, hadith terminology, right? And you guys, in the previous semester, you guys have learned about, ahadith that are mutawatir, ahad, mursal, and, just the different categories of ahadith. Generally speaking, around the world, when students want to start this science, they start off with one of the most famous primers in the science called Nukhbatul Fiqh. And that's written by Imam Ibn Hajar. So Ibn Hajar, it doesn't matter what madhab you study in, it doesn't matter what ideology you have as a Muslim, you're going to come over Imam Ibn Hajar's work somewhere down the line. So this is a monumental scholar in Islamic history, and he compiled this book called Bulugh al-Maram. Now we have this book for sale, right? Bulugh al-Maram, right here at Afghan Institute. So if you want to purchase this book, just speak to Sister Shariza at the office, inshallah. So Bulugh al-Maram is the book Bulugh al-Maram, the entire title of Bulugh al-Maram, Ibn Hajar called his book Bulugh al-Maram min Adillat al-Ahkam. Bulugh al-Maram literally means attaining the objective. Right, attaining the objective, all right? And this is a work that he compiled ahadith, the most famous ahadith when it comes to rulings, when it comes to fiqh. In other words, when you study the ahadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you find that there are sometimes ahadith that deal with the akhirah. There's ahadith that deal with Jannah, Jahannam. There's ahadith that deal with the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This book, Bulugh al-Maram, only compiles ahadith that are relevant to ahkam, to rulings, to fiqh rulings. In other words, do not expect that you're going to find a hadith about the Day of Judgment in Bulugh al-Maram. There's going to be some of them, right? But only when they're relevant to ahkam, when they're relevant to rulings in Islam. So that's exactly the book that we will be using as a basis for our course, inshallah ta'ala. Now we're going to be going over Kitab al-Tahara, right? Which is the book of purification. So Ibn Hajar, the way that he organized Kitab al-Tahara was that he firstly spoke about water. He spoke about water. The first chapter is Babul Miyah, the chapter of water. The second chapter is Babu Izalat al-Najasati wa Bayaniha, is the chapter clarifying najasa, clarifying impurities and how to remove them. right? And then he mentions different chapters that have different things to do with purification as a whole. So when you come out of this course, inshallah ta'ala, you guys will have a comprehensive understanding of how to be pure as a Muslim. Right? What is the type of water that you should use? What is the type of water that you should not use? How should you make wudu? Right? How should you make ghusl? What is tayammum? When can you do tayammum? When can you not do tayammum? Right? And all of the different situations. And inshallah ta'ala, we're going to mention many modern day situations that we can find ourselves in so that we can implement this knowledge that we learned. Inshallah ta'ala. We're also going to be mentioning, I'm going to try to not mention this too much, but we're going to mention some of the differences of opinion that the scholars have concerning the ahadith that we deal with. Okay? So there's over 100 hadiths in Kitab al-Tahara, in the chapter of purification. So inshallah ta'ala, every week we're going to deal with anywhere from 1 to 5 ahadith on a weekly basis until we finish this semester and we complete Kitab al-Tahara. Now we're not going to go through every single hadith because sometimes Ibn Hajar, he mentions a hadith that, it doesn't have too much benefit, but he adds a hadith kind of as a supporting evidence. And we're not going to really go through every single hadith, right? But the main ahadith that he's mentioned in this chapter, we're going to go over, inshallah ta'ala. Now, Bulugh al-Maram is one of the most famous books of hadith that students of knowledge memorize, okay? Now, it may seem a bit crazy. I mean, there's about 1,800 hadiths in Bulugh al-Maram, and the scholars, they highly recommend memorizing these hadiths. So if you guys want every week, even if it's memorizing it in English, inshallah ta'ala, that'll be sufficient, inshallah. Just so that when you speak, when you want to understand the Deen, you are understanding the Deen evidence-based. Right? It's very important that we develop ourselves with that mindset of always seeking the dalil, always seeking the proofs and the evidences. So inshallah ta'ala, let's begin, inshallah. So what are some benefits of learning from a text? Right? We have our course that is based on a particular text. Why is it important to start your learning based on a particular text? When it comes to students now, you find a lot of students, when they want to learn about Islam, they watch a bunch of lectures, right? They watch a bunch of YouTube lectures, and there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this. But once you're moving from this lecture to that lecture, this conference to that conference, and you're not in a structured system, then what's going to end up happening is a person feels like they're in chaos. They're learning one little bit of knowledge here, one little bit of knowledge there, and it's disconnected. There's no progression in that knowledge. So let's talk about some benefits of learning from a text. Number one, this text is evidence-based. Like I said, this is a book of hadith. So first and foremost, we're going to learn what did the Prophet ﷺ, what did he say about purification? That's the most important thing. Forget about what I say. It doesn't matter how big of a scholar a person is. The statement of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, we don't put anything in front of that. Right? Allah Azza wa Jal, we had a course called of brick and mortar. Right? Brick and mortar, where we went over the tafsir of Surah Al-Hujurat. The first ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tuqaddimu bayna yaday Allahi wa rasulih. Oh, you who believe, don't put anything in front of Allah and His Messenger. So us as believers, we as believers, we don't put anything in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So that's the most important thing for us to study, and that's the sunnah. Number two, it's easier to retain knowledge. Once we study a hadith, and we mention the benefits that are derived from that hadith, any situation that you're in your life, and that benefit comes about, you're going to remember the hadith. Right? We learn many things that we learn based on association. And once we associate whatever we're learning to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and specific narrations, that's going to help you remember those narrations, inshallah ta'ala. And like I said, if you memorize this, these ahadith, then you wouldn't have that problem, inshallah. Number three, we can benefit from the author's sequence in how he placed the hadiths. And we're going to see this, inshallah ta'ala. I'm going to give you one example. In the chapter, Ibn Hajar mentions Babu Nawaqid al-Wudu, the chapter of the things that break wudu. We're going to go through this, inshallah. But just to give you one small example of what I'm talking about, the third point that we mentioned is we benefit from the author's sequence. Ibn Hajar put certain hadiths next to certain hadiths on purpose. So I'm going to give you an example. In the chapter of what breaks the wudu, right, Ibn Hajar mentions the hadith of Talq ibn Ali, where somebody asked the Prophet ﷺ, should we make wudu from touching a private part? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, no, إِنَّمَا هُوَ بَضَعَةٌ مِنْكَ, that it's only a body part. You shouldn't make wudu from touching the private part, it's just the body part. Let's say it's like touching your nose, it's like touching your hand. No. Okay, now that hadith has been narrated by a few scholars. We're going to go through this in detail. I just want to give you this small example. Right after that hadith, Ibn Hajar mentions the hadith of Busra bint Safwan radiallahu anha, where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, "Man massa dhakarahu falyatawadda." Whoever touches his private part, let him make wudu. So you have two seemingly contradicting hadiths. You don't think, like Ibn Hajar, he put those two hadiths there on purpose. Why? Because there's a way of solving the contradiction. There's no contradiction. There's a way of solving that contradiction. But Ibn Hajar wants to put those two hadiths so that when the student of knowledge, when he learns this book, he sees two hadiths that are apparently contradicting, and that's upon a student of knowledge to find a way to reconcile between those two things. Right? And it's a very important science that there is in Islam that deals with usul al-fiqh, and that is how to reconcile between texts that apparently contradict. Okay, so Ibn Hajar, he put certain hadiths next to each other on purpose so that you can, when you're studying this book, you have those two apparently contradicting hadiths together so you can find the way that they're not contradicting. And number 4, it's, of course, more organized and structured. And once you study from a particular text, you're not here, you're not there, right? It's structured, right? You're following a curriculum. Any school you go to, whether it's college, high school, middle school, you're given a curriculum, and you kind of, there's levels that you progress through, right? So that's important that we kind of stick with a particular curriculum and a particular methodology when we study Islam, inshallah ta'ala. So now, when it comes to purification, let's just talk about the importance of purification. So this entire course is called Clean Deen, right? Clean Deen. We want to have a clean Deen. We don't want to be dirty. We don't want to be filthy. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "At-tuhuru shatrul iman," that purification is half of faith. So in Islam, there's a lot of emphasis that is placed on purification. So if you want to be a dirty person, let's say you speak to somebody about Islam and they want to become a Muslim, right? And you tell them that Islam is a deen of purification, and they say, "No, man, I want to be a dirty person." Right? Islam does not accept any type of filth, any type of, nastiness. Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be clean. Purity is half of faith. Right? So every time you teach your kids about purity, it's so important that we're pure as Muslims. Okay? So let's just talk about the importance of purification now. Now the purpose, our purpose of creation is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a hadith, there's an ayah at the end of Surah Al-Dhariyat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created the humans and the jinn except to worship me. And the next class after this is going to be your first session in the course of Light and Fire, where you're going to learn about the jinn. But in this course, in this particular ayah that I'm mentioning, Allah, He says, I only created the human beings and the jinn to worship me. So right away, you get a benefit about the jinns in our class. So the jinns and the human beings, we're all created to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's your only purpose. All right? Now, when it comes to salah, the greatest act of worship that you can do after saying the shahada is the salah. Okay, generally speaking. There's a hadith in the Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim, narrated by Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, أفضل الأعمال, that the best of actions is as-salatu fi awwali waqtiha, is salah in the beginning of its time. The best deed that somebody can do is a salah in the beginning of its time. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. So if salah is one of the best deeds that you can do, right? What is the link between salah and purification, right? When it comes to purification, there's a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said that لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم, that Allah will not accept the salah of one of you إذا أحدث, when he uses the bathroom, حتى يتوضأ, until he makes wudu, until he purifies himself. So in other words, the key to salah is purification. Right? So if salah is the greatest deed that you're doing as a Muslim, then obviously you have to pay attention to what you need to do so that salah is valid. If you're not pure, your salah is not valid. If you don't make wudu, your salah is not accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just think about this, that by you learning purification is not just something that you don't need, right? We need this for our salah. We need this to fulfill that objective by which we are created for, right? That's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And traditionally, the scholars, the fuqaha, they would always begin their books of fiqh with speaking about water. Right? So we're going to be speaking about the first hadith today, inshallah ta'ala, in Bulugh al-Maram. And that hadith discusses water. Now somebody might be like, I don't care about water, right? You need water to make wudu. You need wudu to make salah. And you need to make salah to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fulfill that objective. So water is very important. Right? Water is very important. So always a lot of the times we study certain things, but we don't know why we're studying certain things. So this is why we're studying about water. Right? If it wasn't for this, then we wouldn't care about water. Right? But we need it for our purification. Now let's just talk about fiqh. Okay? What is fiqh? If we say that we're studying fiqh here, what exactly is fiqh? A lot of Muslims, they use this word, and a lot of people just don't understand what exactly it means. Okay? Fiqh linguistically means to understand something. Okay? Literally, it means to understand something. So, in Islam, you have a lot of words that we use. It has a linguistic meaning, but it also has a meaning that we use Islamically. Like, I'm going to give you one example. For example, salah. Salah. Obviously, if I ask anybody here, what is salah? You're going to tell me, it's when you make takbir, you pray 5 times a day, right? That's what salah is. But salah has a linguistic definition, right? The definition of praying, salah, that's an Islamic definition. But the linguistic definition, the way that the Arabs used to understand this word at the time of the Prophet ﷺ is what? What does salah mean linguistically? It means dua, to supplicate. To supplicate, to call out to a higher power. That's what salah means. Now, if you tell somebody, oh, like for example, there's a person, he doesn't pray salah as we know it, but he just supplicates to Allah. Is that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do when He commands us to make salah? No. Salah has a specific definition Islamically. Right? So when the Prophet ﷺ became a prophet, he taught us how to make salah, and he showed us that it's not just the linguistic definition, but there's a higher dimension of salah Islamically. So linguistically, fiqh literally refers to understanding something. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this in the Quran. So in Surah Hud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about how Shu'aib, he called his people to Islam. And he will be telling his people, and his people were involved in a lot of wrong things financially. They would cheat people, they would, like there was a lot of social injustice in Shu'aib's time among his people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, قَالُوا يَا Shu'aib, that they said, oh Shu'aib, مَا نَفْقَهُ, that we don't understand. So the word fiqh, right? The word nafqahu is derived from the word fiqh. So they said, مَا نَفْقَهُ كَثِيرًا مِمَّا تَقُولُ. We don't understand much of what you say. If you go home and you look at the Arabic, I know I just recited it, right? But inshallah ta'ala, go home and look at the actual Arabic. You'll see that the word that they use to say that they don't understand is the same word. That it has the word, the letter fa in it, qaf and ha. Nafqahu. Alright, you guys will see what I'm talking about, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, and this is just a benefit that any ayah we go over, try to go home and read that ayah. Try to go home and read the tafsir of the ayah. Is going to create a much more broader understanding of what we're talking about, inshallah. Now, there's another hadith with the Prophet ﷺ. This hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari, and it's narrated by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, radiyallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah wants good for, He gives him fiqh in the religion. يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Yufaqih literally means to give somebody fiqh, to give somebody understanding. So we can see that we've mentioned an ayah of the Quran and we mentioned a hadith that deals with the linguistic definition of fiqh. Right? So this subject that we're studying, and that is fiqh, is not just understanding. We're not learning just how to understand something. Fiqh is much more specific. So when we deal with the technical definition, right, and the technical definition relates to the definition of fiqh in terms of what we're studying. Right? So fiqh as a subject now. So we're not talking about fiqh linguistically, but fiqh as a subject. What is fiqh as a subject? When you study fiqh at the masjid, when you study fiqh according to the Hanafi madhab, or the Shafi'i madhab, or the Hanbali madhab, or Maliki madhab, what exactly is fiqh? Okay? So let's just stick with this definition right here. Scholars have different definitions, but let's just stick with this definition, inshallah ta'ala. So fiqh, technically, in this science that we're learning, fiqh is knowledge. So we know that this is a branch of knowledge, it's a science that we're learning, of practical legal rulings. Okay, now what does this mean? Practical legal rulings. What this means is that these are rulings that relate to your practice. Right? That relate to your practice. We said that we're learning how to make wudu. Is that a physical practice? Yes, it is. Right? Ghusl, is that a physical practice? Yes, it is. Salah, is that a physical practice? Yes, it is. Right? So it's a practice that you actually do. Now, what this does not include are theological branches of knowledge. Fiqh does not deal with your belief because that's not practical. Is everybody with me so far? So fiqh does not deal with your belief. The next class that you guys are taking after this of Light and Fire with Ustadh Zakir about the jinns and angels, that deals with theological, theological knowledge. That deals with things that you have to believe in. But fiqh does not involve anything that you believe in. Fiqh is about the physical practices that you do as a Muslim. So let's go over this again, right? So fiqh, technically, as a subject, fiqh is the knowledge of practical legal rulings. So these are rulings in Islam. Very quickly, somebody give me the 5 legal rulings that we have in Islam. Anyone? Quickly, what are the 5 rulings that we have in Islam? The 5 legal rulings. If we say that fiqh is studying practical legal rulings, what are legal rulings? Quickly. It has to be one of you that knows this. Yeah, let's get the mic up here, inshallah.
Is shahada one of them?
Shahada?
Yeah. No.
No, that's a practice that we do. All right, but in terms of the rulings, okay. So, for example, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Sometimes somebody asks a sheikh, what's the ruling on eating gelatin? And a sheikh is going to give you a particular ruling, right? What are some rulings that he might give you? Anyone? Yes. Jello? No, that's not what the ruling is. I see what you're saying, but yeah. Haram, excellent, good. So there are 5 rulings in Islam. In other words, anything that you're approaching, it could either be under 5 categories. One of them is haram, right? So for example, can I eat this chicken or not? What is the ruling on this chicken? Sometimes the scholar may say it's haram. That's a ruling. Now there's 4 more, right? Just yell it out. What are just halal, haram, right? Halal, haram. What are the 3 other ones? Okay, makruh, disliked. What else we got? Huh? Mandub, which is recommended. What else we got? Mubah is synonymous with halal. What else? Mustahab is synonymous with mandub. What else? You have wajib, something's obligatory. So let me go over this again. I know it's, I was just trying to see if you guys know what I'm talking about, but let's list them inshallah ta'ala so you guys can write it in your notes. So the 5 legal rulings that there are, number 1 is wajib. Wajib means obligatory. So anytime you hear me say something is wajib, that means that you have to do it, you don't have a choice as a Muslim. So for example, let me ask you guys a question, just yell out the answer. Is making wudu before salah wajib? Yes it is, you don't have a choice because Allah is not going to accept your salah. Do you see how beautiful that is? That things are sometimes wajib. Praying salah, is that wajib? Yes. Right? Being a good Muslim, right? That fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's wajib. So wajib means that you have to do it. And I'm giving you some examples. Number 2 is recommended. And the Arabic word for that, wajib is obligatory. You can call this one mustahab. Mustahab. Everybody repeat after me. Mustahab. Right? Mustahab. Everybody one more time. Mustahab. Good. Mustahab means recommended. Right? Do you have to do it? No, you don't have to do it, but it's best if you do it. You get rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somebody just yell out a quick example of something that's mustahab. Sunnah prayers. Sunnah prayers. What else? Just yell it out. Good. The Salat al-Duha or the Ishraq prayer, right? Recommended prayers. You have sunnah prayers. What else? Sadaqah, giving sadaqah, right? Giving charity. That's recommended. Do you have to give charity to the point that if you don't do it, Allah will punish you? No, that's zakah. But sadaqah is recommended. You don't have to, but it's best if you do so. So far we have wajib, obligatory. We got number 2, mustahab, recommended. Number 3 is, you can call this one mubah. Everybody repeat after me. Mubah. If you want to spell it, M-U-B-A-H. Mubah. Now mubah means permissible. It's not obligatory as if you have to do it. It's not recommended, but it's okay, it's fine. Somebody yell out an example of something that's mubah. Eating, that's allowed? Eating non-halal meat? Or did you say eating halal meat? Not halal meat? No, okay, that's not mubah. Okay, your meat has to be halal, right? So that's the opposite of mubah, right? Somebody give me an example of mubah. Playing sports. Playing sports is mubah. Does Allah command us to play sports? Not necessarily, right? Now, is it permissible to play sports? It's permissible. It's mubah. It's not recommended. It's not obligatory, but it's okay. So if you want to understand what mubah is, that means that something is okay. Okay? Give me another example, quickly. Anything. Huh? Hunting. Hunting is permissible, right? It may be recommended. It may be recommended. Somebody's hunting to get an animal to share to their family members, to give them the meat, right? That may be recommended. But the general rule is that it's permissible, right? I'm going to give you some more examples so you guys understand what I'm talking about. Wearing a blue shirt. That's mubah. Is it recommended to wear a blue shirt in Islam? Is it obligatory? No. It's fine. You want to wear blue, you want to wear black, whatever. All right? Another example is you want to eat cauliflower. You want to eat broccoli. These are things that are mubah. It's not necessarily recommended to eat any one of those foods, right? So the 4th category, so we got so far wajib, Mustahab, mubah. The fourth one is makruh. Now makruh, everybody repeat after me. Makruh. It has like a H sound at the end. So if you want to spell it, it's M-A-K-R-O-O-H. Right? Makruh. Makruh means something is disliked. Right? Meaning, you won't get a sin if you do it, but it's best not to do it. Somebody give me an example of something that's makruh. Eating shrimp? We're going to talk about shrimp in a second, right? Let's hold off on shrimp. Anyone else? Drinking while standing, right? In other words, if I drink while standing up, am I doing something haram? No. Now, if I stay away from it, it's better. It's just disliked not to, it's disliked to stand up while drinking, or to drink while standing, right? It's disliked, yeah? Using the right hand, according to the majority of scholars, they hold the view that it's recommended to drink with the right hand. Other scholars mention that it's obligatory, but that's a whole different discussion. But according to that view, it will be disliked to drink with the left hand or to eat with the left hand. But I think this suffices us with examples. And then the last category is haram. Now everybody knows what haram is, right? That's not a mystery to us. So far, to recap what we just mentioned, wajib, you gotta do it. Mustahab, it's better to do it. Mubah, it's fine if you do it. Makruh, best not to do it. And haram, don't do it. Is everybody clear on this? Alhamdulillah. So fiqh is dealing with all of those categories. So when you study fiqh, all of the time you're going to be studying that something is wajib, something is mustahab, something is mubah, something is makruh, and something is haram. And obviously that deals with practical things, right? Eating and drinking. All the stuff we mentioned is practical. And these are rulings that are derived from specific evidences. We'll talk about what specific evidences refers to inshallah ta'ala. Now definitions, there are two qualities that definitions should have. We just saw a definition, right? Definitions, the way that the scholars would make definitions is that they would keep two things in mind. They would try to make their definitions comprehensive and exclusive at the same time. Okay? In other words, if you want to understand how a definition should be, it should be specific. Definition should be specific. Now, if I give you an example, if I'm defining banana as a fruit, right? Is that exclusive? Is that specific? If you ask me, hey, what is a banana? And I tell you banana is a fruit. Strawberry is a fruit as well. Right? So that's not specific there. That's just a broad definition. Like for example, if I tell you banana is a fruit and it's yellow and it's long, right? And it has, like you peel it to eat it, right? If I tell you that, then you can differentiate banana from other fruits, right? So that's not a proper definition. Now definitions, this whole concept of definitions, not too important. I think this is pretty much common sense for the most part. So you need to tell how things differ from other things to truly understand them, all right? So now we said that fiqh is derived from specific evidences. Now what are we talking about specific evidences, all right? There are two things that we're going to talk about, and that's general evidences and specific evidences. Now, general evidences, you guys, I just want you guys not to write right now. Just, lend me your ears, inshallah. General evidences refers to the specific evidences that we follow as Muslims. For example, is what your mom says in Islam an evidence for you to base your worship on? No, it's not. So what exactly is evidence? The Quran, Sunnah, Ijma'. Ijma' is consensus. We'll be mentioning this a bit, inshallah ta'ala, Ijma', so you guys will see what I'm talking about. And there's also Qiyas as well. But these are the sources of Islamic law. When we, if you want to write down this point, very important. If you want to understand what are general evidences, those are the sources of Islamic law. Right? Just put a little note. That's very important to understand. General evidences refers to the sources of Islamic law. So generally, where do we take our evidences from as Muslims? Is what your mom says an evidence? Is what your imam says an evidence? Is what your community says, is that an evidence? Right? That's what that discussion revolves around general evidences. Right? But specific evidences are those particular verses of the Quran. Specific evidences are particular hadiths from the Sunnah. The general evidence is Quran. Specific evidence, which ayah are we talking about? General evidence is the Sunnah, as we mentioned here, right? The hadith. But which hadith are we talking about? Those are specific evidences. So if you look at it, right? If you look back at our definition, right? We said that fiqh is knowledge of practical legal rulings that are derived from specific evidences. So are we going to be studying about the Quran as a whole? Are we going to be studying about this, hadith as a whole? No. Right? We're going to be studying specific ayahs from the Quran, specific hadiths from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and specific instances of ijma', inshallah ta'ala. Okay, we'll be talking about what ijma' means and statements of the companions and things like that, inshallah ta'ala. But is everybody clear on what fiqh is? Is everybody clear what fiqh is? Alhamdulillah. Alright, so let's move on, inshallah. Now, when you study fiqh, number one thing you're going to notice is how many opinions there are. Malik has an opinion, Ahmad has an opinion, Ash-Shafi'i has an opinion. And sometimes when you study certain issues, you're like, you don't know where to go. Right? Raise your hand if you've been brought up in a Hanafi background, like your community or your family. Raise your hand if you've been brought up. I mean, me as well, right? Raise your hand if you've been brought up in a Shafi'i background, all right, where your family, your community is Shafi'i, mashallah. What about Hanbali? Hanbali, your people followed the madhab of Imam Ahmad. And no one here? I mean, the Hanbali madhab is probably the smallest madhab in terms of followers in our world today, right? But in fact, the Hanbali madhab is getting really popular though. In the past, maybe about 200 years, the Hanbali madhab is getting really popular. And also you have the Maliki madhab. Anybody was brought up in a Maliki background? Right? The most common is the Hanafi madhab. So when you find that there are these madhahib, different madhabs, schools of thought, right? How exactly should you navigate through these things, these different opinions as Muslims? Number one, let's talk about why these opinions happen. Why are there so many differing of opinions, inshallah ta'ala? The first reason why there's differences of opinion is that sometimes a text is not accessible. Sometimes a scholar, Abu Hanifa, would make a particular ruling because sometimes a hadith just doesn't reach him. Right? Sometimes you read about how Abu Hanifa said a certain statement, but the Prophet ﷺ just said a statement that contradicts that. Right? Sometimes you find certain scholars, they make rulings that directly go against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So sometimes, we shouldn't, when we deal with matters of difference of opinion, we should be respectful. Right? Nobody should ever condemn Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik because they go against your opinion. Right? They tried their best. And we try our best as well. And nobody's criticized for doing so. So, for example, a text, a hadith may not have reached them. Because these scholars lived over 1,000 years ago, right? I mean, mashallah, we have smartphones where we have hadiths in the palm of our hands. Right? You could download books. Right? If you really want to download every single book of hadith that's available in the Islamic library today, you can download it on your phone. Abu Hanifa didn't have that. So basically, hadiths, people would travel like 200 miles just to hear hadith. So sometimes a scholar may make a ruling. He may say something is wajib. He may say something is haram based on the hadiths that he has with him. Right? You have to act upon whatever has reached you from the sunnah. So sometimes they may say a statement, but it may go against another hadith that has not reached them. Is everybody clear on this point? Right? Second reason is that they don't even see that hadith as valid. They don't even see that hadith as valid. Let me give you one example. In the chapter of wudu, in Bulugh al-Maram, there's a hadith that Ibn Hajar mentions. And that hadith is narrated by Abu Hurairah, and it's in the Sunan of Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, and Ahmad as well. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا وضوء لمن لم يذكر اسم الله عليه. That there's no wudu for the one who does not mention Allah's name. In other words, if you don't say Bismillah before your wudu, there's no wudu. That's a hadith that's been narrated. Now Imam Ahmad, Ibn Hajar mentions this as well. Imam Ahmad, he said, لا يثبت فيه شيء. He says this hadith is not authentic. You see, this is a hadith. Scholars have differences of opinion whether it's authentic or not. So the scholars who say it is authentic, they're going to be like, you got to say Bismillah before the wudu. Imam Ahmad, he didn't consider that hadith as authentic, so he's like, you don't need to say Bismillah before the wudu. Is everybody clear how this works? So that's how you have Imam Ahmad saying a particular statement, but then the other scholars, they have different views. Because there's a difference of opinion in terms of the authenticity of that hadith. Right? Is everybody clear on this? Good. So that's the second reason. Third reason is that the general evidence. We said general evidences are what? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', statements of the Sahaba. Right? Sometimes some scholars, they have different sources of Islamic law that they take. Let me give you one example. Imam Malik, one of the sources of Islamic law, according to Imam Malik, was the actions of the people of Medina. The people of a particular area, the city of the Prophet ﷺ, Imam Malik, he had a view that if the people of Medina agreed on something, that's a proof, just as Quran is a proof, just as the Sunnah is a proof. You guys see how that works? Now, the other three scholars that we mentioned, Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, and Ahmad, they rejected this principle. So because of that, sometimes Imam Malik would say a certain view because of that general evidence that he has, that he's following, and other scholars may say a different ruling. Is everybody clear on this? Right? And for the most part, guys, for the most part, the scholars, they differ when it comes to principles. Right? If you follow a certain principle, that's going to lead you to a certain ruling. And we're going to talk about what this means and give many examples of this, inshallah. And sometimes the scholars may differ in terms of definition. Right? And hold on to point number 4. I'm going to show you how point number 4, in this hadith that we're going to deal with in a bit, inshallah ta'ala, I'll show you what number 4 refers to, inshallah ta'ala. And number 5, application of principles. Scholars have different principles that they follow, and because of those principles, it leads to different rulings. Right? So these 5 are generally the reasons why scholars differ. Okay, so depending on what text you have, depending on whether or not you see the text as valid, depending on what general evidence you're going to use, depending on how you view a term, the definition of a term, depending on what principles you follow, you're going to have different rulings. Okay? Now, what is the wisdom behind differences of opinion? Somebody may say, if Allah wanted, Allah could just make everything clear. Right? And absolutely, whatever Allah wants to do, Allah can do it. There's no mistakes in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah left things the way they are on purpose. So there's a hikmah behind it. Now the Sahaba, ridwanullahi alayhim, the Sahaba, they differed as well. A lot of people don't understand this. You know, sometimes we go into a masjid, we see people praying differently. We see people having different views and opinions. Don't think that the Sahaba were all united in terms of fiqh. In terms of belief, they were united. But in terms of fiqh, in terms of the practical rulings, they differed tremendously. That's why you find that one Sahabi would say that this breaks your wudu, other Sahabi would say it doesn't break your wudu. So the Sahaba, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they differed in their rulings as well. Is everybody clear on this? And for the most part, most opinions that you find scholars have, you're going to find that those opinions go back to the Sahaba. A lot of people don't understand this. When Abu Hanifa had a view, don't think it's just Abu Hanifa. Sometimes Abu Hurairah had that view. Sometimes Abdullah ibn Umar had that view. The Sahaba had these views. So that's why we have to be very tolerant when it comes to differences of opinion. Now, it's a test to see who loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a believer, your entire mission in life is to search for the truth and to implement it. And that's before you accept Islam, and that's while you're a Muslim until you die. It doesn't matter how much guidance you have. That's why we say, Ihdina Surat al-Mustaqim. That's why we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us on a straight path. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, in authentic hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha, she tells us that when the Prophet ﷺ would pray the night prayer, every night he would make this dua. And he would say, Allahumma hdini lima ikhtulifa fihi min al-haqi bi-idhnik. The Prophet ﷺ would say, Oh Allah, guide me to the truth in which the people have differed in. So many different opinions. The Prophet ﷺ would ask Allah to guide him to the truth in what people differ in by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission. Right? And then he would say, إِنَّكَ تَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ, that you guide to a straight path. So even the Prophet ﷺ, his mission was to find the truth. So it doesn't matter how long you live, your mission is to find the truth. Whether it comes to the religion of Islam, to finding Islam as the truth, or finding different opinions when it comes to fiqh within Islam. Right? So it's a mission that we all have to be on, and that's to find the truth and to implement it as best as we can. And the Sahaba differed in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he didn't criticize any of them. Umar had his views sometimes, Abu Bakr had his views, but the Prophet ﷺ did not rebuke any of them. There's certain areas when it comes to fiqh, you can have differences of opinion. Right? Your husband has an opinion, you have a different opinion. Nothing wrong with that. Your son has a different opinion, you as a parent have a particular opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. This shouldn't be a means of bickering. It shouldn't be a means of argument. Oh, you believe that this is not wajib, now I'm going to kick you out the house. Like, no, it doesn't work like that, right? If anybody had to have that mindset, the Sahaba would have had that mindset, but they didn't. So we have to be very lenient. All right, now let's talk about where did fiqh come from. Obviously, the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba, right? So the Prophet ﷺ directly taught the Sahaba these rulings. He showed that you need to make wudu before salah. He showed us how to make wudu. He showed us all of these different things. The 4 caliphs. Who are we talking about when we talk about the 4 caliphs? We're talking about Abu Bakr, or Umar, or Uthman, and Ali. I'm pretty sure you guys have studied this in the previous course. So these became, these 4 companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, or Uthman, and Ali, they became the leaders after the Prophet ﷺ's death. All right? Now, during their time, you would find that the Sahaba, they were hesitant when it comes to giving fatwa. Now, giving fatwa means to give a ruling. To say something is wajib, mustahab, mubah, makruh, or haram. That's what it means to give a ruling. The Sahaba, they were, you would find that sometimes somebody would travel to go get a ruling from the Sahaba, And one Sahabi would point to another one. And then he would point to another one. That don't ask me, ask him. Don't ask me and ask him. And they would go around the entire circle until it came back to the first person. None of them wanted to open their mouth. They were that afraid of saying something wrong. Nowadays, like, what's our perspective? I don't even know what I'm talking about, but it's wajib. It's mustahab. This is haram, akhi. You shouldn't do this. And we open up our mouth and speak about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the authority. That's not how the Sahaba were. And they're the best of, of this ummah. And they tolerated their different, their different opinions. You find that Ali had an opinion, Ibn Abbas had an opinion, but they were cool about it. Right? It's like, you're my brother, we used to, be with the Prophet ﷺ, and everything is fine. Right? That we agree to disagree. Right? Now the time of Hassan, radiallahu anhu, who was the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, when he became the Khalifa, he was about the Khalifa, just for about 6 months he was the Khalifa. Now during this time you find that there are so many differences of opinion that have become codified in different schools of thoughts. So just as the Sahaba had different views, the followers of the Sahaba in specific areas, they had different schools and methods of studying Islam. So for example, you find that there were a lot of sects that formed in this time. You have this group called Ahlul Ra'i in Iraq. Right? They followed a lot of logic, and they followed a lot of, just logical reasonings behind the rulings. For example, Abu Hanifa was from Ahlul Ra'i. Right? He was in Kufa in Iraq. Okay? Whereas you find Ahlul Hadith in Hijaz. People that were stern on following the Ahadith that have been narrated. For example, Imam Malik was from Ahlul Hadith. Imam Shafi'i is from Ahlul Hadith. So you have different scholars, they have different views because of the different areas that they were in. Right? And when it comes to the Imams of Fiqh, when we talk about these different Imams, Imam Ahmad, right, Imam Shafi'i, these are all different scholars that the Ummah has followed their methodology in studying Fiqh. So for example, Imam Abu Hanifa died 150 years after the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. Right, you have Imam Malik who was slightly after Abu Hanifa, right, he died slightly after in 179. You find Ash-Shafi'i who died in the year 204, and Imam Ahmad died in the year 241. Now, are these the only 4 madhabs that we have? Are these the only 4 schools of thoughts that we have? No. Right? There were other scholars that were alive during this time. I'm going to give you one example. Imam Shafi'i, who is the 3rd one on the list, he studied with Imam Malik. Okay, Imam Shafi'i was a student of Imam Malik. Now, did Shafi'i bind himself to the views of Malik? He didn't. Right? So Shafi'i, he studied with Imam Malik. After Imam Malik passed away, Shafi'i then studied with the student of Abu Hanifa by the name Muhammad al-Shaybani. Okay? Then Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he studied with a man named Al-Layth ibn Sa'd in Egypt. Do you know what Imam Shafi'i said about Al-Layth ibn Sa'd? He said that Al-Layth afqahu min Malik. That Al-Layth, he's afqah, he has more fiqh, he has more understanding than Imam Malik. Now because Imam Al-Layth ibn Sa'd in Egypt, he didn't have a lot of students. Right? His students didn't carry on his methodology. It kind of, it eventually died out. But because these 4 scholars became so popular, right? So popular, that's what we are referring to when we talk about the 4 madhabs, right? We talk about the Hanafi madhab, the Maliki madhab, Shafi'i madhab, the Hanbali madhab. We're talking about these 4 scholars. Now, as I told you, Shafi'i, he studied with Malik. He studied with the student of Abu Hanifa, and Imam Ahmad studied under Imam Shafi'i. So in a way, they all studied from each other, and they didn't bind themselves by the statements of their teachers, right? If Imam Shafi'i learned from Imam Malik, why is there a Shafi'i madhab, right? Why is there a different methodology of studying Islam known as a Shafi'i madhab? That's because he separated himself from the teachings of Malik in many, in many instances. So you find that they all studied from each other, and what you find is that they did not tell the people to blindly follow them, right? Imam Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, they both said a particular statement. They said, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي. If the hadith is authentic, then that's my madhab. Right? If the hadith is authentic, that is my madhab. You find that Imam Malik, rahimahullah, he said, كُلٌّ يُؤْخَذُ مِنْ قَوْلِهِ وَيُتْرَكُ إِلَّا صَاحِبَ هَذَا الْقَبْرِ. Imam Malik, he said, everybody's statement is either accepted or rejected. And he pointed to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, except the man who is in this grave. Right? Everybody's statement is, can be under scrutiny. Right? You can criticize my statement, I can criticize your statement. But when it comes to Allah's statement and His Messenger ﷺ, then that's where we say, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We hear and we obey. right? But every scholar is subject to criticism. Every scholar, every statement that we make. Okay, so we need to, ground ourselves in that understanding. Imam Ahmad, when people were mentioning different, narrations of scholars and following the speech of the scholars, Imam Ahmad, he said, عَجِبْتُ لِقَوْمٍ عَرَفُوا الْإِسْنَادَ وَصِحَّتَهُ يَذْهَبُونَ إِلَىٰ رَأْيِ سُفْيَانَ. Imam Ahmad, he said, I'm amazed with some people. The hadith is authentic, but then they go to this scholar, Sufyan al-Thawri. They go to that scholar, but the hadith is very clear and authentic. So this is how these scholars, they train their followers to not take their statements, but to follow where they took it from, right? To follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, when it comes to following a madhab, can you follow a madhab? Nothing wrong with that. If you want to follow the Hanafi madhab, you want to follow the Shafi'i, Maliki madhab, the Hanbali madhab, go ahead. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And in fact, to be honest, I think that the best way to study fiqh is to study it through a madhab. Personally, I study fiqh through the Hanbali madhab, right? And I benefited tremendously. Whatever madhab you want to study from is perfectly fine. Now, when we go through this course, inshallah ta'ala, we're not going to stick with any particular madhab, right? We're going to be mentioning different opinions and trying to find the one that is the strongest. And we're going to be mentioning, every ruling that we mention, we're going to try to mention the scholar that had that particular ruling. Now, scholars, they describe our times as kind of a time of a renaissance, in which we have this wealth of knowledge that the scholars have left behind us. And you find that there are many scholars in recent history who didn't bind themselves to a particular madhab, and they tried to find the best view in each particular madhab. They didn't bind themselves. So if you're following the Hanafi madhab, don't be rigid. Don't be rigid and blind follow Imam Abu Hanifa or a Shafi'i. Right? Try to be open-minded at the same time, because everybody's statement is taken or it's rejected, except the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Now when we talk about taqleed, this is concept of taqleed in Islam. Now what does taqleed refer to? Taqleed refers to blind following. Right? Taqleed refers to blind following. That's the most common, understanding of taqleed that people have, and it's blind following. But taqleed literally refers to following something without evidence. Right? If you ask a sheikh a question and he gives you the answer, he gives you the ruling and he doesn't give you evidence and you just follow his statement, then that's considered taqleed. You're making taqleed of that person. Right? You're making taqleed of that scholar. Okay? Now let's talk about taqleed. When is taqleed okay? When is it not okay? Okay? If you're somebody who is a mujtahid, what is a mujtahid? Somebody tell me, what is a mujtahid? What is a mujtahid? What does that even mean? Anyone? A reformer? The word for reformer in Arabic is mujaddid. But mujtahid, it comes, it's very similar. Yeah. Somebody who can issue a fatwa. Excellent. So a mujtahid is somebody who has the capabilities of deriving rulings from the text. None of us here today, none of us are mujtahid. Does anybody? Please come up and start teaching so I can sit down, right? But for the most part, a mujtahid that's a very high level of Islamic scholarship where a person has that status. There are very few scholars in Islamic history who's reached that status. But if a person is a mujtahid, right? If a person is a mujtahid, then they should not make taqleed except in situations of necessity. You're right? Except in situations of necessity where they can't find the ruling, they just have to follow the statement of a scholar before them. Okay? If you're general folk like us, okay, then it's permissible to do taqleed with certain conditions. Right? And that condition is that you find a scholar that you trust. You find a scholar that you trust or a student of knowledge that you trust, and you can follow their statement if you don't have the capabilities of doing the research on your own. So for example, what do I mean that you have to find a scholar that you trust? Number one, it has to be a scholar that's alive, right? Somebody that can discuss the issue with you. Number two, has to be a scholar that you're satisfied with their knowledge. You feel this person has studied this issue, in depth, and I'm going to follow their view. And number three, has to be a person that you're confident in their religiosity. You have to feel that this person is a pious person. Inshallah ta'ala, if these three conditions are fulfilled, then you can follow somebody. But like I said, if you have the capabilities of researching, then that's what you do. Right? And if you're a student of knowledge, you try to find the evidence as much as possible. And that's what we are trying to be, students of knowledge. Right? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from all of us. Ameen. Now let's talk about the first hadith. Very short, basic, very simple hadith to understand. It's not a hadith that's complicated in any way. Now this is hadith number 1 of Bulugh al-Maram. Ibn Hajar put this as the first hadith. Now this hadith is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Okay? And he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said the following statement about seawater. So are we talking about fresh water here? Are we talking about the water in the pool? Are we talking about the water that comes out of the faucet? No. The Prophet ﷺ said this following statement about the sea. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, هُوَ الطَّهُورُ مَاؤُهُ الْحِلُّ مَيْتَتُهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said about the seawater that its water is tahur, and its animals that have died in the sea, they're all permissible to eat. They're halal. Okay? And this hadith is recorded in the Sunan of Imam al-Tirmidhi. It's also in other books as well. It's in Abu Dawood, it's in Nasa'i, it's Ibn Majah, Ibn Abi Shayba. And many scholars have mentioned this hadith is sahih. For example, Imam al-Tirmidhi himself, he says this hadith is sahih. And there's no dispute concerning the authenticity of this hadith. Like a very weak dispute, but this hadith, you can be assured that this hadith is authentic. Okay? Now what are some benefits from this hadith? This hadith first and foremost revolves around a story. So why did the Prophet ﷺ, why did he say this statement? There's a reason why he said this statement. He was asked a question and this was the answer that he gave. Now the question that he was asked was, some of the Sahaba, they said, "O Messenger of Allah, we're out at sea and we're riding on the ship and we have a little bit of water." So the Sahaba then said, فَإِن تَوَضَّأْنَا بِهِ عَطِشْنَا. If we make wudu with this water, we're going to become dehydrated. Right? In other words, you need water to make wudu. But the Sahaba, they had very little fresh water on their boat. So they're asking the Prophet ﷺ that can we make أَفَنَتَوَضَّأُ بِمَاءِ الْبَحْرِ? Should we make wudu with the water of the sea? So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the water is tahur. We're going to talk about what this means. And he said, and it's dead or lawful to eat. If there's any animal that's washed up from the sea, it's halal to eat it. Okay? So let's talk about some benefits from this. Why didn't he just say yes? When the Sahaba said, can we make wudu with the water of the sea? Why didn't he just say yes? Right? The reason why he didn't say yes is that he didn't want them to think that it's just because of a case of necessity. In Islam, there are certain things that are only permissible in times of necessity. Can somebody give me a quick example? What is something that's only permissible in a time of necessity, where you're in absolute need? Eating pork. If you're starving now, if you're starving, you have nothing else to eat, then it's permissible to eat pork, only to the extent by which it's going to keep you alive. Now, the Sahaba, they said they have very little water. And they're asking the Prophet, can we make wudu with the water of the sea? The Prophet didn't say yes, because people may think that that's just because of a necessity. But it's not because of a darura. It's not because of a necessity. He said the water is tahur. The water is pure. So that anybody who is questioning, can I use this water? It's permissible to use this water. Right? So there you can see the wisdom in the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Some people may think that when the Prophet ﷺ, if he said yes, you can use it, some people may think that that's just when you're at sea. But what about if you're at the beach? Can you use the seawater? Right? So the Prophet said that the seawater is clean, it's pure. And some people may think that it's only about wudu. The Sahaba, they asked the Prophet ﷺ about wudu. Should we make wudu? He didn't say yes. He said the water is pure. So every water that's pure, you can make wudu with. Is everybody clear on this point? So you can see that there's wisdom in how the Prophet ﷺ, how he answered this hadith. And he saw that these people, if they didn't have a lot of water, guess what? They're probably not going to have a lot of food. So he told them that the water is pure, and whatever animals die in the sea, you can eat it. Because he knew the situation of these people. You're out at sea, you might be stranded, right? You need to eat. So then he told them about the food as well. And this shows us that anytime anybody asks you for advice, just try to benefit the people as much as you can. Even if the person didn't ask you a question, or they didn't ask you about a particular thing, when you answer them or give them advice, try to give them some more benefit, inshallah ta'ala. And that's how the Prophet ﷺ, that's how he answered this question. All right? Now, another benefit we get from this hadith is you don't have to carry, like a huge reservoir of water every time, everywhere you go. The Prophet ﷺ did not tell the Sahaba that, no, you can't use the seawater, you're supposed to bring enough water with you. Right? In other words, if you don't have a lot of water, you have a little bit of water, and you're going out on your journey, it's okay. You don't have to carry a huge amount of water to suffice you, right? Just take whatever you can, all right? And also, another benefit the scholars mentioned from this hadith is water is pure in its original state. So whether you go to, the jungle and you go to a creek and the water is a bit brownish, right? The water, when you put it in a jug, there's a bit of a tint in the water, like there's a bit of brownness or yellowness in the water, it's permissible to use. If you go to the sea, sometimes you go to certain places, certain beaches, the water has a particular color when you fill it up, right? In a clear container, you see it's a bit brownish, right? It's a bit like grayish, the water has a bit of a color, it's permissible to use. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the seawater is permissible to use, right? That it is, it is pure. And even if the seawater is salty, right? Even if the seawater is salty, because the Sahaba thought, if we can't drink it, then we can't make wudu with it, right? But whatever water you can drink, that water you can purify yourself with, okay? And also, we see that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whatever dies, al-hillu maytatu, the mayta, the animals that die in the sea, they are hil, they are halal. So any animal that is purely a sea animal, we're talking about a fish, a shark, octopus, a squid, whatever animal you can think of, right? You see those fish that live all in the bottom of the sea that have the lights on them, you could eat those as well, barbecue him, right? So all of these, all like the Prophet he mentioned a general principle here, that all animals that die in the sea are halal. Now the scholars, they have difference of opinion, like the brother mentioned shrimp. Okay, the Hanafi scholars, they mention, I don't want to go into this too much, but they have reasons why they say that it's not permissible to eat shrimp. Okay, other Hanafi scholars have different details. It's a long issue, but the correct view, inshallah ta'ala, is what the Prophet ﷺ said, and that all, sea animals that die, that they're permissible. Now, do you need to slaughter a fish? Do you need to cut the knife, the bihad, the fish, and let the blood flow? No. Right? As long as the animal dies, when you go fishing, just throw it in the bucket and it's fine. It's halal. The Prophet said that the mayta, and mayta, the word that the Prophet used, refers to an animal that dies without slaughter. So the Sahaba, there's a hadith, an authentic hadith that the Sahaba, they went out for a battle, an expedition. And they were starving, they didn't have any food. So they passed by the shore of the sea, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jalla caused a whale to come out. And they found the whale that was already dead there. So what did the Sahaba do? They went to that whale, and they would cut the fat of the whale, and they stayed there for almost a month, benefiting from that whale. And the narrations mentioned that this whale was so huge that somebody would ride underneath the rib cage, like inside of the rib cage of this whale. In other words, if the rib cage is exposed, they use a lot of this whale. So when they went back to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he asked them if they have any of that whale meat, and he took it for himself. So in other words, even if an animal just dies, we're talking about a sea animal here. We're not talking about a dog that dies, falls in the water, and then drowns. Oh, it's permissible to eat the dog. No, we're talking about a sea animal here. Right, but you had a question? Crab?
Yeah.
Let's wait till I'm done, and I'll address that, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? So when it comes to, now when it comes to animals that live both in sea and land, okay, like for example crabs. Sometimes you have crabs that just live in the sea. Lobsters and crabs, they just live underwater, that's it. Okay, but then you have some land crabs who they're on the beach and they live on land, but sometimes they go in the water as well. What do you do when for example, alligators or crocodiles, they're in the water and they're on the sea? When it comes to, like different, like turtles, right? Some types of snakes, turtles, different animals. So the scholars, they have a lot of difference of opinion about this. I know the subject of what we're talking about is not foods that are halal and foods that are haram, okay? But these are certain things that scholars take into consideration. They would look, there's certain cases where the sea animal would take the rulings of an animal that lives on land. For example, Imam Malik, his view that if there was a sea animal that also lived on land, like a turtle, or like for example a crab, Imam Malik, his view that any animal that both lives on land and sea would take the ruling of the animals that live on land. Other scholars may have differences of opinion. All right. For example, there are certain cases where animals that live on land, some scholars would say that they take the rulings of the animal that lives in the sea. So listen, this is an issue that there's a lot of difference of opinion in. Some scholars mention that it depends where they die. Okay. Other scholars may say it depends where they're born. Okay. But like I said, the view that I personally take, you don't have to follow the view that I personally take, but because you asked me about, like let's say crabs, if it's a crab that lives in the sea alone, then there's no issue about that. If it's a crab that also lives on land and in the sea, personally I take the view of Imam Malik, where it would take the ruling of a land animal because it lives on land as well. Okay? Now if it's a crab, if it's a crab that has flowing blood, then it would need to be slaughtered. You would need to kill that crab however best you can. Or if it's a turtle, or if it's like an animal, for example, Imam Ahmad, Ibn Qudama mentioned that Imam Ahmad, he said that how he dislikes that a person eats a turtle without slaughtering that turtle first. So there's a lot of differences of opinion, but inshallah ta'ala, even if it's a land crab, if it's been slaughtered properly, all right, if it's been like actually killed, I know it's kind of a difficult because it's, it's a hard animal, but if it's been slaughtered, if it's a turtle, like a land turtle, and it also lives in the sea as well, if it's slaughtered, then inshallah ta'ala, it'll be permissible. But like I said, for the most part, we don't really have that problem for most foods. If you want to be safe and stay away from it because of the difference of opinion, then inshallah ta'ala, that's fine to do as well. But like I said, the scholars have difference of opinion about this. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the water of the bahr, the water of the sea, is tahur. What does tahur refer to? Tahur means it's something you can use for purification. So the water is tahur, you can use it to purify. Now the word tuhur is act of purifying. You find that there are many words in the Arabic language that are similar to this. For example, suhur sounds just like tuhur. Suhur refers to the act of eating that meal. Now sahur refers to the actual meal that you eat. Suhur is the action, sahur is the actual thing that you do the action with, the food. Tuhur is the action, tahur is what you do the action with. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the water is tahur, so you can use it to purify yourself. So water, the seawater, you can make ghusl with it, you can make wudu with it, inshallah ta'ala. Now when we talk about fluids in Islam, when we talk about water, okay, water can either be tahur, as the Prophet ﷺ said about the seawater, and water can also be najis. Water can be impure, and inshallah ta'ala in the next classes we're going to talk about what this means and when is water najis. But najis means impure water. Can I use impure, dirty water as a Muslim to make wudu with? In other words, let's say somebody, urinates in a tub or something. Can I go in that? Obviously, everybody's going to say no. Why would you even do that, right? But obviously, if somebody does that, their wudu will not be valid because it's najis water. It's impure water, right? So as Muslims, we have to try to use as clean water as we can, all right? And fluids can also be tahir as well. For example, orange juice. Orange juice. Does orange juice purify you to make wudu? No, it's not. It's just pure, but it's not purifying. That's a fluid that's not tahur, but it's tahir. So inshallah ta'ala, for homework, I want you guys to look over these terms because we're going to be mentioning these three terms a lot, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? So we'll stop here. Hopefully you guys have taken notes and everything was clear, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions? Listen, if you want to ask about any type of specific foods, whether it's turtles or crabs or whatever, it's fine. Yeah.
Talks about seawater. Talks about seawater, but what about just a little pond?
A little pond, we're going to talk about that. That's in the 5th hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah. You'll see it, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, in the back.
So, I have a question.
Sure.
In terms of like chicken, like, BJ's and Costco, like a lot of these places we go and shop, is it permissible to like buy the chicken from these places?
Okay, so it depends. Personally, me, listen, if it says halal on the box, inshallah ta'ala, it's okay. Right? You're not commanded as a Muslim to be a private investigator in every single matter. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of people, they have this sickness that's, called waswas, where everything, it's like they're paranoid about everything. Did I make wudu properly? Did I clean myself in the bathroom properly? Did I pray salah? And they live their life where they're paranoid about everything. And that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. If it says halal, inshallah ta'ala, is permissible, you can buy it. Now, if it doesn't, that's where scholars have difference of opinion. We live in a country that's predominantly occupied by Christians, sometimes Jews, and seculars as well. Personally, I would advise to eat the meat unless it says halal on it or unless it says kosher. Because we can eat from the people of the book, okay? But to be honest, this country for the most part is secular. This country is ruled by secular laws. It's not a theocracy where it's run by Christians. And for the most part, those Christians who have these companies that slaughter, they don't even follow their own laws in the first place. But Jews have a specific process where they make their meat kosher. So you can know that this is proper under Jewish law, But when it comes to, a secular land where their slaughterhouses have nothing to do with Christianity, their slaughterhouses have nothing to do with anything that has anything to do with the Christian religion, I would say it's best to stay away from that. So like I said, if it's kosher, inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions, وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ. And the food of the people of the book is halal for you. So you can be, you can rest assured that something that's kosher has undergone, kosher, Jewish laws, just as something halal is under Islamic law. But I wouldn't advise anybody to eat the meat that they're not clear about, besides, besides if it's halal or kosher, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Anyone else?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll take about 2 more questions and then we'll get started with our next class, inshallah. Yeah, back there. Rulon, he has a question. Yeah.
Would tea be like purifying or?
Tea? No, because it's not water. Right? We're going to talk about the hadith number 2. The Prophet speaks about water in general. We're going to address tea, inshallah ta'ala, and juice and things like that. But no, it has to be water. Yeah. Okay, what about frogs from the sea? This is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ naha an qatl al-difda'. The Prophet he forbade killing the frog. So because of that, the majority of the fuqaha, they mention that it's haram to eat frogs because the Prophet forbade killing them. And if you can't kill them, how are you going to eat them? Alive? So because of that, the majority of the fuqaha, they mention that eating frogs is specifically haram, whether it's from the sea or from if it's a land, frog. So that's specifically referring to frogs. So according to the majority of scholars, it would not be permissible to eat frogs. So let's stop here, inshallah ta'ala. If you have any other questions, if something was not clear, just write it down and we'll address it next week, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.